And welcome, everybody, to the first ever episode of the Sports with Scott podcast. I'm your host, Scott Reichel. It is currently Monday afternoon, February 26th on the East Coast, and we're going to talk about some sports. Now, first of all, it's the first ever episode, so welcome. But it's not actually the first episode. It's kind of an explanation there. During COVID, a long time ago, I was pretty bored one day and decided to record an episode or two. Unfortunately, I realized that there were no sports going on at the time, so a sports podcast didn't really make much sense to start up with. So I ended up doing my first ever episode on a bracket that I saw on Twitter from FoxBet. Maybe you remember that sportsbook before it completely went out of business. Point is, though, they had a bracket of sports movies, and I proceeded to rant about sports movies for about an hour and a half. Now, I ended up deleting it. Ended up getting, I don't even know how many views, like maybe 10, give or take. But either way, technically, I've done an episode before of this podcast, not for about 4 years. So we're back, and I'm going to make it more current, and I'm going to talk about some current events in basketball. Now, I'm sure some of you might be wondering, Scott, who the hell are you? Why would I listen to your show? So I'll explain that. First of all, as I said a second ago, I'm Scott Reichel, and I'm a professional sports bettor. Now, I know that there are a lot of bettors who have podcasts already. They tend to do gambling podcasts. I get that. I have a bunch of podcasts already with gambling. And that's kind of the reason why I'm doing this podcast, because even though I do pretty well when it comes to gambling and I cover a bunch of sports with the SGPN Sports Gam Podcast Network, and even with Winners and Whiners giving out daily free picks. Point is, though, every single podcast that I do has the same gambling component to it, and I am still a sports fan at heart, so I do want to kind of take away from some of the gambling talk and talk mostly about the sports themselves, and that's kind of why I wanted to get into a sports-only, non-gambling type of podcast where I could rant about sports. So if you want my betting picks, they're all free. I don't charge anything for them. I've done well for ever since I started doing it, basically 7-8 years ago, back when I was in college. Point is, though, I still have gambling access on Twitter, and I still have gambling picks on YouTube, etc., all free. So if you want to check that out, you can. But this will be a sports only, no gambling podcast. I might mention gambling just for the sake of context. If I want to talk about some, for example, awards in basketball, for example, and I want to mention the overall market consensus on who should be expected to win the award, etc. I might mention odds just for context, but nothing more than that. Now, you might be also wondering, what leagues do I actually follow? The answer is a lot of them. I follow the NFL, college basketball, college football, hockey, baseball, NBA, men's tennis. I follow EPL soccer, La Liga soccer, UFC, WNBA, and women's tennis, albeit women's tennis not as much as men's tennis. So I do follow basically every league you could think of. I even dabble with golf and NASCAR. So the point is, I do follow a bunch of sports, and that's why we're going to cover a lot of topics in this podcast for the foreseeable future. Now, the issue that you run into when you're starting a new podcast is what the first topic of conversation is going to be. Because you're supposed to reel in the audience, and you're supposed to try to make it engaging, and you're supposed to have something fresh in everybody's mind, something that is kind of the hot topic, so to speak, that is going to get the people going. So I'm going to focus on one topic that I'm kind of passionate about, but I also saw was circulating around Twitter, especially NBA Twitter, for the last couple of days, and that is going to be the MVP discussion. Now, part of the reason why I ended up making the podcast, besides the fact that I wanted to actually have a non-gambling sports show, I also just have a lot of free time on my hands in the afternoons, and I spent the morning trying, keyword trying, to watch First Take. Now, I have not watched First Take in a long time, probably since Skip was still on the show. It's been a long time since I've actually tried to watch First Take. I got through about 30 seconds. Now, I put it on, and they're in the middle of the MVP conversation. In basketball, you have Stephen A. and you have Shannon, and the first things I hear from Stephen A. Once again, I'm trying to actually get through the show with an open mind. I'm trying to see how long I could actually handle the show before I get annoyed. And the first thing I hear Stephen A. say is his first choice is Jason Tatum, and his second choice is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. My initial reaction, I turned it off. I got through 30 seconds and I decided this is not worth my time. I'd rather actually listen to something productive. Now, the reason why I was so annoyed by the response that Stephen A gave, not to mention the fact that I think it's just overall not genuine. I think everybody knows deep down Jokic should be the favorite to win MVP right now, and the odds makers definitely believe in that because Jokic is a minus price to be the favorite. To actually win it. I don't know if you actually, if you're new to gambling, it's fine. The point is you have to look at the odds and realize Joker is expected to win the MVP. Shea's in second with a decent gap in between. So Joker's definitely the favorite, but it's not a runaway favorite. Now, the reason why I got annoyed by Stephen A bringing up Tatum in first place, Tatum being MVP makes absolutely no sense. And it seems like every year we have this certain narrative where the MVP award gets a little bit stale and we try to, I don't want to say invent new candidates, but we try to push agendas with new players to try to generate some buzz for the actual awards. And none of it is actually genuine. We've heard it the last couple of years. Remember DeRozan with the Bulls? He kept hitting those game-winning shots. He was a candidate for maybe a week. Booker has been a candidate in the past for about a week, and neither of them had any shot to actually win the award. And it was a waste of people's times. Tatum's got no chance to win the award, so there's no point even talking about it. And yes, I know the counter argument is, well, the Celtics are still very good, and they're the best team in the league record-wise, and Tatum is the best player on the best team, so he should be in the running. No, he shouldn't, because if you have the best supporting cast in the league, I can't tell how valuable you truly are if your team can still win when you're not on the court. And you're looking at the Celtics lineups with Jaylen Brown being an all-star. Porzingis has been great when healthy. Derek White was a fringe all-star this season. They acquired Jrue Holiday, who's been known as being a very solid on-ball defender, and overall just a former championship-winning point guard to help with the pedigree. I don't think Drew's the same guy he used to be on Milwaukee, but the point is he's still a well-known point guard that's a solid supporting piece. So even though Tatum is having a good year, and even though the Celtics have the best record, you should not artificially put him in the front-runner spot and force him in a conversation that he has no business being in just because the team's record is elite. So I think the Tatum argument's ridiculous. He's got no chance to win, which is why the gambling aspect of these markets are important, because they kind of ignore all of the hype and all of the talking heads talking and trying to praise certain players and trying to build up agendas. They're focused on money, and that kind of cuts through all that nonsense. And Tatum is nowhere near the top couple of favorites, so I don't think Tatum's got a chance in hell to win the award. Most people don't either. It's just annoying to hear Tatum's name constantly being talked about in this award when he's probably best case scenario fifth. I mean, you're thinking of the MVP candidates. You got Joker, you got Shea, you got Luka, you got Giannis. All four of them are ahead of Tatum, in my eyes at least. You can argue maybe Giannis not, because I know it's not exactly focused on the playing, but if you get your coach fired and you end up getting Doc Rivers a job, that's the opposite of valuable. But Giannis would be ahead of Tatum if we were doing a vote. So Tatum's in fifth, best case scenario. He's not winning. So I'm not going to spend much more time on that. The point is, though, that's where the conversation on the Talking Head show started, and I remembered why I never watched First Take. So I kind of decided to actually try to spread some, I don't want to sound kind of full of myself, some knowledgeable takes, some down-to-earth takes that I think kind of need to be said, and that's why I started with the MVP conversation. Now, Shea I can understand, because OKC might be the 1 seed by the end of the season, and Shea has had a phenomenal season. I'm not going to tell you that Shea has been, don't get me wrong, underwhelming. Of course he is not. He's been a phenomenal player. He will be a first-team All-NBA guy, no doubt about it. He's averaging over 31 points per game, averaging over 6 assists per game, over 5 rebounds per game, and he is shooting 54.8% from the floor on a young team that is 40-17. So I know that Shea has had a great year. Having said that, I do kind of wonder why so many people are just so willing to give him the award over Jokic when Jokic has clearly been the better player for the entire season. Now, Shea does have better points per game numbers than Joker. Also has a lot more free throws and shot attempts, but still. Point is, Joker's averaging 26 points per game. I'm going to round down. 26 points per game, 12 rebounds per game, and 9 assists per game on 58% shooting. And he's also shooting 35% from 3, also averaging 0.9 blocks and 1.2 steals per game. So Joker's easily the best player in the world. It's not even close, as far as I'm concerned. Now, the people that argue with that would argue that his defense is still not great. I agree with that. He's not a great defensive player. Defense has really never mattered in the MVP award, so I'm not going to suddenly factor it in. I'm trying to think of when the last time it actually mattered was. Maybe Dwight Howard. Like, it's been a long time since an MVP candidate had defensive numbers being mentioned, so I'm not going to bother mentioning it now. Now, Joker is on the I'd say he's on the warpath based on how he's done for the last couple of games. To read off Joker's stats for the last 3 games, they are otherworldly. So the first 3 games post All-Star break, 21, 19, and 15 with 100% field goal shooting. Didn't miss a shot, missed a free throw in that game. But he had 21 points and 19 rebounds, 15 assists. Next game, 29 points, 15 rebounds, 14 assists on 70.6% field goal. And the game against the Warriors on national TV on Sunday, 32 points, 16 rebounds, 16 assists on 54.2% shooting from the floor. He had 3 straight triple-doubles before the start of the fourth quarter. Now, I have not seen that probably since Westbrook in his prime back in OKC, maybe even in Washington. He had a couple triple-doubles there with Washington. The point is, it's something that you don't see that often. And I know Shea is great. I get it. There's a lot of jokes going around with Shea that no matter what the event actually is, he will always drop 30 points basically on the dot, and he's going to have the same stat line every game. Joker's numbers are just so much better all around than Shea's besides the points. And I know standings matter to some degree, but this kind of feels like a new age LeBron versus Derrick Rose MVP race, where you might remember Rose got the MVP award. It was the first year that LeBron joined the Big Three in Miami. Derrick Rose led the Bulls to the 1 seed. The Heat smacked them in the playoffs, and the rest was history. But the point is, Derrick Rose got the award. A lot of people were against it because LeBron was the best player in the league. Derrick Rose led a surprise number 1 seed, and he got rewarded based on the narrative. Now, at the time, I was not against Rose getting the MVP. And I do think that even though you want to make that comparison, it's not exactly the same because Joker is a pretty well-liked guy for the most part. I know some talking media heads will push back against him, and I'm not mentioning all of the dumb people on Twitter who just want to discredit Joker to support their own favorite player. That's not what I mean. The media, for the most part, likes Joker. The issue with LeBron was he became the biggest villain in arguably league history, at least in modern NBA history. I'm not talking about for example, the Bill Laimbeer cheap shot artist type of hate. I mean, he turned himself into the biggest villain in modern sports because he kind of sabotaged the integrity of the NBA. Now, if you're a LeBron fan, you're going to fight back on that and say, well, Cleveland wasn't giving him support. He wanted to get out of there. His teams weren't any good. I get that. The point is there was a narrative around LeBron that he ruined the NBA, and I feel like voters held it against him and said, why would we vote for you to win MVP if you fled to get yourself a better supporting cast so you would not have to be as valuable to your respective team? I think that was the argument back then, and Derrick Rose was having a monster coming out party to being a superstar in the league. Of course, he had the injuries after that, which sucks, but still. At the time, Rose winning MVP, I can understand. It was mostly based on LeBron hate in the media. I think we can agree on that when you reflect on the time he was initially in Miami. Now, for Joker and Shea, Joker is easily the best player in the league. He's off a title. One of the most complete finals runs or title runs I've seen in the NBA in a while. He was just unstoppable the entire playoffs. His worst series was the first round against Minnesota. And that was mostly based on field goal percentage. But after that, he completely dominated, killed Phoenix. They swept the Lakers, and they killed Miami. So Joker had a phenomenal run, and I think we all know deep down he's the best player. The reason why I think a lot of people are against him is kind of threefold. One is there's a bit of xenophobia around with the NBA and how the Europeans have kind of taken over the sport, whether it involves Wemby, whether it involves Luka, whether it involves Joker. Wemby, that's a separate category because he's not there yet, but I think we all know what the ceiling can be for Wemby in the future. The point is, in a league where most of the teams besides the Raptors are located in America, it is maybe annoying to some fans that foreigners, so to speak, are really just dominating the NBA. And I feel like that's kind of a reason why people are kind of pushing back against Joker. Doesn't really work for Shea, though, because he's Canadian, but still. Point is, I feel like that's kind of an issue people have against Joker, not to mention the fact that he has, I'd say, a unique body type, let's put it that way, for a dominant basketball player. You expect great athletes to have a certain physique to them, and Joker does not have that, so I do think most people don't exactly view Joker as seriously as they can. They might be trolling on Twitter, but still. Point is, I think some people hold it against him that he has a certain, let's say, husky body type, and I feel like people say this is not what a star basketball player, the face of the league, should look like. This is not what you might think it is, but this is what the peak male performance looks like. That's what I have to say about Joker. I don't care about that, but I think that's the reason why people don't exactly like him. It's because he doesn't really look the part, and they get annoyed when a heavier guy who looks out of shape is dominating your team for 35, 15, and 15. I think that's kind of the reason why as well. And also, I got to mention it, there's a racial component in there where it's a white guy dominating the league, and I think some people are annoyed by that. So I just think that those three factors can be why some people might try to discredit Joker or why they try to push other narratives over him instead of just acknowledging how good he is at the sport. He's one of the best players I've ever seen. And I can go into a full-on argument about that. I might save that for a future episode. The point is, though, Joker, I think, should easily be the favorite to an MVP. Shea is a worthy second place. The point is, though, about LeBron and D Rose. I think if Shea gets the award, it will be similarly to the way Derrick Rose won it. He had an extreme, I'd say, boost to his game, even though we kind of saw this from Shea last year. But OKC has come out of nowhere to be the number one seed in the West right now. We'll see if they get it, but that's the narrative supporting Shea. I think the award should go to the best overall player, and that's easily Joker. I don't think it's close. It was going to be Embiid, then Embiid got hurt. He's not going to reach the game criteria. Unfortunate. It is what it is, but I do think Joker is easily my pick to an MVP. Nothing against Shea. I just think Joker is, in my lifetime, one of the best players I've ever seen. And you can honestly make a case, in case anybody was wondering, I'm 26, so I missed most of Jordan's career. I missed Orlando Shaq. I kind of caught the back end of Shaq with the Lakers. And you can go down the line. Duncan, kind of the same story. Missed the late 90s, caught the mid to late 2000s there for Duncan onward. I honestly think Joker might be the second best player I've ever seen play the sport, with LeBron being one. I still think that Jordan is the best player of all time, by the way. But the point is, I did not see him live. I was not there when he won all those titles with Chicago. Or if I was too young. I was about 1 year old when that ended up happening. So based on that, I'm kind of disqualifying Jordan from the sake of this. Yes, I know I missed part of Shaq's career. I missed Hakeem's career. I get it. Joker is, in my opinion, the second best basketball player I've ever seen in person. And I do think that based on how much better he is than the rest of the league, or at least it feels that way, I think he's the slam dunk choice to be MVP. Now, moving on to the next topic I want to talk about, I am going to stay in the NBA. It's kind of correlated because it does involve social media and it does involve a lot of the discourse I was just talking about for the MVP indirectly. So JJ Redick went on First Take coincidentally, and he kind of had a rant. Now, you could argue the rant was misguided because it seemed like he was kind of trying to promote his own content instead of actually trying to embrace the show he was on. But he was on First Take talking about, I forgot what the exact topic was of conversation, and he basically said something on the lines of NBA fans don't really care about being educated. They want to, I'm paraphrasing, they want to be entertained. And he said that he ended up uploading a video because he does the Old Man and the Three podcast, which is a solid show, by the way. But the point is, he did a video, or let's say a segment, about Zion being a point guard in some offensive sets for New Orleans, and he was critical of the actual amount of views that episode or that video got on his YouTube channel. And yes, it sounded like he was bitter because he was trying to support his own content instead of trying to be a team player and trying to go with the debate narrative on those talking head shows that he agreed to appear on in the first place. But the point is, there was an interesting little dynamic with the question that he brought up, which is if NBA fans actually want to be educated. And I'm going to kind of criticize a decent amount of NBA Twitter, but I think it needs to be said, and I feel like a good mission statement for this show is going to be me always keeping it real. I'm going to say what's on my mind, and I'm going to keep it 100%. So I'm just going to say it as it is. I think a lot of sports fans are very dumb, and I think a lot of sports fans are more interested in the entertainment aspect of sports as opposed to actually trying to figure out the X's and O's and trying to focus more on detailed analysis of what they're watching. I think most people treat sports like a water cooler subject. They want to be passionate about the teams they root for. They will use it as entertainment to watch them actually play. And besides that, they will have hot takes and opinions, and they don't really care about backing it up. And NBA Twitter is a great example of that. Now, I try to be extremely informative, or at least I try to be, when I talk about the NBA, either on gambling podcasts or on just Twitter in general. I'm going to rant. I'm going to try to back it up with some stats and some overall opinions that I think can be justified with stats. But the point is, I don't think most fans want to be educated. I think most fans wake up in the morning, especially for First Take, and say, wow, I'm bored. I need something to watch or have in the background as background noise while I'm doing something else. And a debate show where you just hear two people yelling at each other while you can kind of get the gist of the show while only paying 40% attention, I think is going to win a lot of fans over. And I do think that's why these shows are still popular despite offering nothing in terms of quality content. Most people tune into the debate shows like Undisputed or like First Take because they want to hear some outlandish stuff. They want to hear some crazy sound bites that's going to cause them to tweet about it and that's going to cause a media storm either in favor or against what the host is saying. Skip Bayless, whether you like him or not, is an expert in that area of generating a lot of social media buzz. And every time somebody tweets against him, he wins. Keep that in mind. Now, part of the issue, though, is that a lot of the conversations they have, you can't tell if they're genuine. One, because there is a debate show. I do wonder how many times a specific co-host is told to make up an argument for this angle when they don't actually believe it. I think that is definitely a thing. The other part of it is, once again, the lack of proper just overall sports discourse where they're talking about nothing. I don't know how many times you can argue LeBron versus Jordan in the span of a year, and you do it probably 10 times a year, and it's just a waste of time. Because even if, let's just say, you're able to make cases for Jordan or LeBron, you're not going to change anybody's mind. If you're team LeBron, you're picking LeBron over Jordan. If you're team Jordan, you're picking Jordan over LeBron. You're probably not going to change your opinion. So talking about it for the 10th time in the span of 3 months is not going to change anything. So to go back to what JJ Redick said, I think he brings up a good point. I think most fans don't want to be educated. I think the reason why debate shows do well in sports media is because you really don't have to think a lot while you're, I'd say, consuming that type of content instead of looking at a film study on the Old Man and the Three podcast or hearing a very detailed conversation between Redick and his guest, for example, Tyrese Halliburton. And if you listen to the comments or the overall, I'd say, discussion that Halliburton and Redick had, it was very high level. They're talking about overall defensive sets. They're talking about the read progressions. They're talking about how Halliburton's seeing the floor. It is very, very nuanced and very, very niche. And most fans don't care enough to pay attention to a film study where you see a couple of players, one former player, one current player, nerding out over some actual details on a basketball court. I love that stuff. Most people don't. Most people want the background noise. They want the chaotic sound bites. And that is why I do think Redick brings up a good point. Most fans, in my opinion, do not want to be educated. And you can definitely tell that if you're on NBA Twitter enough, where you can tell that either they're supporting a player or a team, or they're trying to badmouth a player with no evidence whatsoever, and they just say stuff for the sake of being controversial or trying to instill a reaction in somebody else. So I do think that there's no way to combat it, for the record, because I think that with so many options for sports coverage, whether it's podcasting now, even if you want to go on XM radio, you want to go on AM radio for a sports show that's still around, you know what I mean? Point is, there's a lot of ways to consume sports media. And most of the time, you're not going to find people driving to work trying to listen to an X's and O's podcast. It's not going to happen. Some do, most don't. You're probably listening to something gambling related because you have picks and you want to actually make some money that night. You're going to try to before you eventually spend it all on a 10-pick parlay. But the point is, I do think Redick brings up a good point. To answer his question, most NBA fans are not educated and they don't want to be, and that's how it goes. Some do. Maybe some will dabble in that type of area, but most prefer the, I'd say, reactionary type of content, and that is what they're going to stick with. So to segue into that, I'm going to bring up a separate topic of conversation, staying with the NBA. Apologies that there's a lot of NBA coverage. NFL season's over. I have a little bit of baseball to talk about, but I might save that for another show. Nothing really that substantial. So I am going to stay with the NBA because I want to circle back to the Reddit comments about NBA fans, but I want to use a separate example unrelated to the initial source material that Redick was referencing. Because I saw on Twitter that there was a debate going on between Victor Wembanyama and Anthony Edwards. Not directly, but based on their fans. So there was a tweet that came out, which was kind of lighthearted, but it was a question by Ben Steiner. And he had the question, or it was a hypothetical scenario. His scenario was, I'm going to read it word for word. Your team is instructed that they need to win 2 NBA championships by 2035. Who are you building around? Anthony Edwards or Victor Wembanyama? Now, once again, you can't pick Luka, you can't pick Joker. Those are the only 2 options. It's either Anthony Edwards or Victor Wembanyama. 2 titles in 11 years. So it doesn't matter how you break it up. I'm assuming it's a fantasy draft. You're not inheriting the Spurs. You get to pick your own roster, but the point is you have to pick one superstar young guy to build from. And that was the topic of conversation. Now, I think the answer is obviously Wemby, and the answer is obviously Wemby. Now, the reason why I bring it up is because the first 3 comments that I read in the comment section of that tweet said Anthony Edwards all day. To which I responded on Twitter. I quote tweeted this. Quote, when Redick asked if NBA fans wanted to be educated or not, he was referring to everybody in this post comment section that shows Anthony Edwards over Wemby for the next 11 years. If you choose Ant over Wemby for the next 11 years, you don't know ball. Simple as that. That's what I wrote. I stand by it. I think anyone who would take Anthony Edwards over Wemby for the next 11 years is an idiot. And I'm going to fully say that. Once again, I'm going to keep it real. I think that there is no world where you'd rather take Ant over Wemby if you're going to assume perfect health. Now, you could always argue Wemby is a unicorn. He's an alien. And we've seen bigger guys get injured with leg problems over the years. Let's assume for the sake of argument, full health. Ant's been injured too for the last couple of years. Nothing major, but still, he does miss some games with some leg injuries. So the reason why I'm so passionate about Wemby being the obvious choice is because of the fact that Wemby has a certain trajectory where he might end up being a top 10 player in the history of the sport. I know it's his rookie season, but he's doing things we've never seen before. And the reason why I brought it up is because I don't understand how so many people are so obsessed with putting Anthony Edwards in conversations he doesn't belong in. And I wanted to kind of segue with still focusing on this conversation between Edwards and Wemby, the concept of aura in sports. I think aura is a bunch of nonsense. Now, it's very common where you will hear fans and people on social media referring to the way a player plays, either reminding them of other famous, legendary players, or there's just a certain indescribable characteristic to their play style that you think is going to turn them into a star that will make them an instant success and a successful player for a long time. I'll stick with Anthony Edwards for now. Most people watch him play, and they really compare him to Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. They really try to, whether it's the smooth jump shot, the certain swagger about him, they try to find similarities between modern-day NBA players and former players from previous generations that were Hall of Famers, arguably greatest players of all time. Now, the issue with Ant is that he's not Jordan and he's not Kobe, but the fans really want him to be. And I understand that Ant has a lot of funny and overall solid sound bites. He's a very, very entertaining person to listen to, but I don't understand really the arguments of why Edwards in so many conversations to be this next either face of the league or to be a potential MVP candidate. I remember Kevin Garnett was talking about how he would vote for Edwards to be MVP right now, which is a moronic take. I'm going to say that right now. The point is Edwards this season, though, has had good numbers, roughly 26 points per game, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 46.8% field goal, and he's shooting 38.4% from 3. He's had a good year. I'm not going to dismiss that. I don't think people realize how good Wemby is, or they just think Edwards is, because of aura, supposed to be automatically viewed as the next Kobe and MJ, which is disrespectful to Kobe and MJ, because those guys are once-in-generation players. Jordan's the GOAT, as far as I'm concerned. Kobe is a top 5, top 10 player of all time. He's not top 3. I'm not telling you he's top 3. He's probably top 5, top 10. I would probably have him somewhere around there. Point is, they're all-time great players, and Ant so far in his career has won 0 playoff series, and I feel like I need to see more from Ant before I start crowning him as being the next future face of the league. He's still young, though. I'm aware of it. Minnesota might be the 1 seed. He has a supporting cast around him that's very solid. We'll see what happens in the playoffs. But aura is something I wanted to mention because it goes back to NBA fans really not being that educated because they don't have an explanation for why they think certain players belong in certain conversations. And Ant, to segue from the Wemby conversation, I'll get back to it in a second, had a separate conversation. This is a quote from Anthony Edwards when he was walking with Stephen A. I think it was All-Star Weekend. They were walking down the tunnel. And he was asked about other players as peers in the league. And he was asked about Shea and he was asked about Luka. And Stephen basically asked him where Ant thinks he would rank himself compared to those 2 players. And he said, I feel like I'm the better player compared to Shea and Luka. And some people are going to go out of here and say that's that Mamba mentality. That's, that certain swagger that we love to see from Ant. Can we at least be realistic? He's not better than Luka. He's not better than Shea. Luka's easily better than Shea and Ant. Luka might be better than Ant ever will be, if we're being honest here. Luka is a generational player who also can be a top 10 player of all time. So the fact that we're having these conversations of Ant being in the same ballpark as Shea and Luka, even though none of the stats back it up, explains why I think aura is an extremely dumb concept. It's because nobody can justify how Ant can even hold a candle to Luka in basketball besides watching him play and going, I can't explain it, but there's something about him that makes him incredible. Give me a break. Luka is an all-time great talent, and you're looking at the numbers, the first-team All-NBA selections, really anything you want to look at for Luka, it's better than Ant. It's not close. Luka should be in a separate category. Luka belongs in the Embiid and Joker category instead of comparing him, or the Giannis category, instead of comparing him to Ant and Shea. That's disrespectful. Luka's much better than that. Now, the argument would be between Ant and Shea, and only one of them is a top 2 favorite to be the MVP. It's not Ant. I'm going to tell you that right now. Now, Ant could change that narrative in the future if he has a great playoff run, or if he's going to have a monster playoff performance. We've seen him have a couple moments against Denver last year where he was solid in that series. They still lost that series in 5, and you also ended up seeing him lose the series to Memphis, where they led almost every game and choked away almost every single game, where Ant ended up having a couple of bad moments. He blew that defensive coverage against Ja, giving up the game-winning layup. There's been some bad moments for Ant in his playoff career. Still very young, though. He can't fix that. Jordan got swept a couple times before he eventually got over the hump in the Eastern Conference, so I'm not writing him off. But I think aura is a great example of why I don't always put much faith personally into people on social media, because they try to force narratives about their favorite players and they try to get players into conversations they really don't belong in. Once again, Ant is a very good young player. I'm not telling you that he's bad, but comparing him to Luka is ridiculous, and comparing him for the next 11 years to Wemby is absurd. To go through Wemby's numbers, besides the offense, I'll mention the actual stats for a second. I'll mention the offense now. So Ant's averaging 26, 5, and 5 on 46% shooting. 47% shooting, give or take. Wemby's averaging 20.7 points per game, 10.1 rebounds per game, 3.3 assists per game, and 46.7% field goal, only shooting 31.8% from 3. Not a great three-point shooter. Decent free throw shooter, though, at about 81%. Now, The thing I got to mention, at least offensively with these players, is that even though Ant is averaging 6 more points per game, I want to remind everybody that Wemby's been on a min restriction for basically the entire year. Ant is averaging 26 points per game on 35 minutes per game, and Wemby's averaging 20.7 points in 28.5 minutes per game. So Wemby's playing roughly 7 minutes fewer than Ant per game, and he's 6 points behind. So if you want to extrapolate his points average and his rebounds average and his assists average to the same amount of playing time that Ant plays, you can make a serious argument that Wemby would have stats that are better than Ant's in almost every single category, and I think that's something I got to mention. So besides the offensive numbers, where Wemby with no min restriction might be comparable to Ant's, he's going to win the rebounding area every single time. But still, the defense is where I think this is a no-brainer on why Wemby is the obvious pick for who you build around for the next 11 years compared to Ant. Because Wemby this season is averaging 3.3 blocks per game, which is the league-leading 3.3 blocks per game, and 1.3 steals per game. A reminder, he's been on a min restriction for most of the season. He's one of the greatest defensive players that I've seen in the modern NBA, and he has the potential to be the greatest defensive player of all time. He has the potential to do that, and Ant will never be that. So even if you want to factor the offense in and give Ant, I'd say, slight edge in that category, the defense isn't close. Wemby's the obvious choice of who's better for the next 11 years, and the only argument people have for Ant is based on aura, which is stupid. Now, I'm going to mention a stat here, which tells you how good Wemby actually is, at especially blocking shots. Total blocks in February. Now, we had the All-Star break, so a couple less games here or there, but Wemby this month has 38 blocks. Do you know how many blocks the Bulls have, for reference, this month? 36. He has 2 more blocks by himself in the month of February than the entire Chicago Bulls team. He has more blocks than the Knicks, more blocks than the Kings, more blocks than the Clippers, more blocks than the Blazers, and more blocks than the Heat, all by himself. He's one of the greatest defensive players I've seen in a long time, and if I ask you right now, who is the best all-time defensive player, most people would probably say Hakeem Olajuwon. Most people. I think that Wemby can be in that conversation. You can mention Ben Wallace. You can mention, if you want to mention Draymond, you can. Dennis Rodman in his prime. Scottie Pippen. You can go down the line. There's a lot of elite defensive players. Gary Payton, you get the point. Wemby's defensive upside is just, in my opinion, unfathomable. And I think that Wemby in that area defensively gives him a certain gear that not enough people talk about. Wemby's going to win multiple Defensive Player of the Year awards. Ant's never going to win one. So besides the offense, you could argue being in Ant's favor right now, I would potentially disagree with that if Wemby played 35 minutes a game instead of playing 28. But defensively, it's not even close. Wemby is going to be the best defensive player in the league for probably a decade and change. And that is why he's the easy choice to be the player you build around for the next 11 years. But the point is, with aura, to go back to what I was saying before, Ant, I don't mind Ant. I mind his overall fan base. They're insufferable. It drives me nuts when they try to push a certain narrative for a player that should not be fitting in a certain, I'd say, category. He's not as good as Shea, and he's nowhere near as good as Luka. Stop pretending that he is. It is what it is. But Wemby, I think, will be the face of this league for a long, long time, and it is warranted because he is insanely good as a rookie, especially for the last 2 months, and he's only scratching the surface. So that's kind of the point I wanted to mention. I wanted to focus more on NBA for the sake of this episode, and I wanted to mention aura with the fan base because I think it kind of ties in well to the Reddit comments, because most fans, you're listening to, or even just reading comment sections on Twitter, I think most people on Twitter realize that most comments in the comment section are absolute nonsense or just absolute bait for engagement. So, yes, I think that you're looking at a lot of fans who choose to not be that educated. The problem is they don't know that they're not educated, and they're extremely passionate about their, I'd say, misinformed beliefs. You can kind of draw a parallel to politics if you want to, regardless of what party you actually support. But the point is, a lot of people claim to know a lot when they really know a little, and they're not going to hear otherwise. And if you disagree with them, they are going to think that you're the idiot and that they're 100% right. Now, I know that might make me seem hypocritical because that's kind of what I'm doing about the Joker MVP and the Wemby conversation against Ant. So, yes, there might be a little bit of hypocrisy in there. I'm trying to back it up with stats, and I'm trying to at least mention why I believe certain things can be true in these debates. Other people just don't seem to have any arguments, and it's just based on feel and just based on opinion and based on aura, and they're not willing to hear any type of compromise with it. And I think that's a problem. So that's going to wrap it up, though, for the first episode of the rebooted Sports with Scott podcast. If you like it, then don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Reichel Radio. A reminder, I do have gambling content, all free, all on YouTube, either in podcast format with the SGPN network, Sports Game Podcast Network. So if you want to find all those podcasts on Spotify or Apple, you can, or on YouTube. We live stream those to cover all the sports they do for the network. I cover the NFL. I cover baseball. I cover NBA. I cover men's tennis. And I cover WNBA as well. Those are all podcasts that I cover betting-wise for that network. I also do daily free picks on YouTube every night on Winners and Whiners. So follow that channel as well if you want my gambling picks.